What's up, guys? We're going to have some fun today. This is a review of Trails in the Sky second chapter that I came across a while back, actually, but it's pretty poorly written, and I feel like we're going to have fun with this, maybe just dunk on it a little bit. Full spoilers for second chapter, by the way. Now, before we get into this, I want to say two things. The first is that you can have any opinion on a game you want, period. And I would even take that one step further and say that you can have an opinion on a game and not even justify it, right? It's just a video game. If my friend told me, hey, I don't like Trails in the Sky, and I don't even know why, I can't describe why. Fair enough. I think we've all been there. However, I think if you're making a review, it's fair to say that if you don't like a game, you should be able to justify it properly, and this guy definitely doesn't do that. Now, the second thing for me is that I want to emphasize that this is a video game. In the grand scheme of things, video games are not important. So while we're going to have fun today, there's no hard feelings towards the guy who wrote this. We just have a disagreement about a video game. It's not a big deal, and even though I feel like he's wrong, and I'm sure many of you guys will feel that he's wrong too, in the long run, it's not a big deal. Okay, so let's get into this, and right off the bat, the title is just hilarious. The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky SC is on the wrong side of the JRPG revival. My god, what a pretentious title, man. Like, what the hell? Trails in the Sky is on the wrong side of history. It's not gonna succeed. Like, the guy's like rooting against it or something. He's trying to predict the future. And the funniest thing is that he's just dead wrong here. Trails in the Sky has got amazing word of mouth. It's slowly picking up in sales on Steam, like throughout the years. It's going up and up and up. Trails of Cold Steel is even more popular. It's recommended on forums all over the place. And with Cold Steel 3's announcement, Trails hype is greater than ever, period. So not only is this a pretentious title, it's just straight up wrong too. So the first tiny issue that I have with this article is right down here. He says that, so he talks about how he doesn't like the game, and he says, for most of my time with it, but I slogged through it waiting for the moment it would end. And for me, I think that if you don't like a game, you shouldn't play it. And what this might tell us is that some editor or something just dumped this on him. Like, they told him you have to review Trails in the Sky SC for some reason, and he didn't want to do it. And if that happened, then that sucks. I kind of feel bad for the guy. It kind of sucks to play a game that you really don't want to play. So maybe we should cut this guy a little bit of slack. Now here he's getting into some of the aspects of the game that he likes. He says, second chapter makes a big deal out of creating a large overarching world with rich political history. Absolutely correct. Here I have a bit of a problem with this sentence. Even though the plot uses the conflict between countries of Liberl and Erebonia as a backdrop to the main plotline revolving around the mercenary Bracer organization. I mean, this is fair enough, but I wouldn't exactly say that the main plotline revolves around Bracers. That's not how I would word it. I would say the main plotline revolves around Estelle and Joshua. That's what the story is about. And if anything, the overarching plotline of the series is about Ouroboros. It's not really about about Bracers, although it's understandable since he's only played SC. Spoilers on that, by the way. Next, my story was only a small part of this world, even as that late became key to its survival. First off, I don't know what this part means, the second part of the sentence, even as that late became key to its survival. Your guess is mine as to what he's trying to say here, but my issue with this sentence, and again, this is going to sound like a nitpick again, is the use of my story. It's not your story. It's Estelle and Joshua's story. And I think this tells us that this guy is a Western RPG fan, because this is something that a WRPG fan would say, right? That it's my story, it's my characters, it's my decisions. It's a very I feel like this guy is coming from a very D&D-like perspective, and I think if you are critiquing JRPGs from a Western RPG viewpoint, or from a Western RPG template, it's not going to work because they're different genres. Now for the worst part of this article. I've never played the first chapter of Trails in the Sky. Oh my god! This actually just killed me. I couldn't believe what I was reading when he just straight up says, yep, I just didn't play the first half of the game. And, oh my god. Guys, in case you didn't know this, if you're going to start the Harry Potter series, don't start on book 4. If you're going to start a movie trilogy, like Lord of the Rings or something, don't start on the second movie. And if you are going to start the Trails in the Sky trilogy, do not start with the game called Second Chapter, okay? You do not start a book on page 500, and you don't start Trails with Second Chapter. Just don't do it, please. Don't do it. He goes on, and have likely missed a lot of the nuance of a few character interactions. Yeah, no shit. But the moment I felt the world was at its most real was when Estelle, the main character, reunited with a new party member I'd never heard of before. It was as though I was taking a vacation with someone returning home, and it showed how much thought developer Neon Falcom has put into creating moments that have little to do with plot, but make every character relatable. I honestly don't even know how to react to this, because it's like he's experiencing something that nobody else did, which is playing second chapter before first chapter. It's not an experience you should be having, so it's like what is even the point of this paragraph? I just don't get what he's going at here. But yeah, I mean, he's correct that Falcom has put a lot of time into creating moments that have little to do with plot but make every character relatable. Sure, you don't have to suffer too much if you don't want to. So this is an interesting paragraph. He basically spends an entire paragraph talking about how it's great that you could replay boss battles at lower difficulty. And I just find that such an odd thing to mention, because this is a fairly short review of the game, and something like this, like, oh yeah, you could replay boss battles and make them easier, is like not the first thing I would think of. Like, I made an entire video on Trails. It was like 25 minutes long or something, and I didn't even mention this because this is inconsequential. Like, who gives a shit that you could replay boss battles? I wouldn't spend an entire paragraph of something that's like only 2 pages long to talk about it. So I feel like even for the positive aspects of this review, he's still wrong. And it also seems like he's bad at the game. Like, this makes it seem like, yeah, I sucked at the game, so I'm glad I was able to lower the difficulty, which is fine. It's okay to suck at a game, but it's just funny. All right, now for the fun part. What you won't like. Second chapter begins just as Joshua discovers he's been the unwitting puppet of Ouroboros, an Illuminati-like organization. So, I wouldn't say he discovers it, more so that he remembers it, but bit of a nitpick. I think discovers is fine here. I just think remembers is the better word here. And suddenly leaves Estelle behind to deal with the repercussions of his absence. Sure. At first, I thought this was an interesting twist since JRPGs rarely follow each other this directly. You don't get to comment on a twist you didn't experience. Like, I don't see how you could understand that. Does this guy understand the feeling of playing through an entire game and then right at the end realizing that one of the main characters, the Dutro agonist, is not who you thought he was? It was a huge twist, and even if you picked up on the foreshadowing that FC has, it's still interesting the way they executed. There's no way you would find out how exactly Joshua isn't the way it seems. So it's just really odd, because here he's pretending like he's played the first game, even though he's said that he hasn't. But it quickly devolves into another save the world plot. No, it doesn't, man. I'm triggered by this line. It's not a save the world plot. If anything, it's the opposite. The world, if you played the game, if you saw the ending, it's pretty clear that the world is not saved at the end of it. Ouroboros still has a lot going for them. You get that scene with Campanella right at the end of second chapter, so the world isn't exactly saved. The plot of SC, second chapter, is Estelle finding Joshua. What I love about this game is that there's this huge plot going on, and you're viewing it through the lens of this really likable character in Estelle and her quest to find Joshua through the midst of things. And sure, yeah, you do stuff that helps out the quote-unquote good guys in this, but you don't save the world. It's not a save the world plot. And while I like many of the characters, others feel like plot conveniences to help writers create intense moments without earning them. You say others and then you only name Joshua. Name a few of them if you're going to pretend like there's multiple of these. So here he says, Joshua specifically made my eyes roll countless times as his newfound omnipresent awareness allowed second chapter to create inescapable situations for the rest of the main cast. So first off, newfound omnipresent awareness. How do you know this is newfound if you didn't play first chapter? If you did play first chapter, you would know that Joshua is incredibly smart right from the beginning of first chapter. Now, as for this, I think he's talking about the glorious escape where he busts Estelle out. First off, spoilers. Second, I think overall the glorious escape gets a pass. You have a sequence where Joshua beats up a couple Jaegers. I think that's fine given that Joshua is an enforcer. Enforcers are stronger than Jaeger. Checks out fine. I think the information that Estelle got captured is something that Joshua would be able to obtain given his position. I think the sketchiest part of it was hijacking that airship. Given that it was under maintenance, it sounds a little bit too convenient, but at the same time, when you realize that Ouroboros is a big organization with a lot of influence, they probably have a lot of airships, and one of them is probably under maintenance. So, a little bit sketch, but I think that escape gets a pass overall, and as for other inescapable situations, I'm not sure what he's talking about. Other characters also perform some questionable leaps of logic that lead them to being on opposing sides. I actually agree with this. At least the first part, questionable leaps of logic. I think he has a fair point here. I will say this: Trails is already a very slow burn, and if you explained every single thing and looked at every single possibility for every situation, I think the game would just drag on even more. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that some characters have leaps of logic, but I also think it does help with the pacing a little bit. So we could agree to disagree here, but I think he's onto something. The plot prioritizes having a few key moments play out and then takes the easier, less convincing route to get there. This is just drivel, have no idea what he's saying here. Second chapter also feels like it takes a few shortcuts when it comes to its structure. It simply doesn't do enough with its own formula to really differentiate from other JRPGs. This is just like reviewer speak, nothing of note here. Even series as old as Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest have found ways to keep their core conceits fresh by reinventing themselves. I lost it here. Final Fantasy is at its lowest of lows right now in terms of quality. The overwhelming majority of the fan base will tell you, yeah, it's at its worst right now. As for Dragon Quest, I'm not an expert on the Dragon Quest series by any means, but Dragon Quest XI was a very traditional game. If anything, Dragon Quest XI and Dragon Quest in general is a series that sticks to its roots. It doesn't really reinvent itself. And if you ask me, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So I think that's fine. In second chapter, however, you're following a quest line from town to town, and the first 40 hours or so felt like an absolute grind, even though I was ignoring most of the monster encounters. Okay, I mean, sure, I guess that's his opinion. I think the first 40 hours are great because you get introduced to all of the enforcers, you get to see the entire cast again, so I would say it's good, but fair enough, I guess. I mean, Trails isn't for everyone, right? You venture into a city, do a few part-time jobs as a bracer, solve a mystery if you want to, and then head towards the end of chapter boss, telegraphed from miles away. This is so dumb. The telegraphed from miles away part, it's like bosses aren't supposed to be unpredictable in JRPGs. When you go to a dungeon in a JRPG, you should understand that there will be a boss at the end of the dungeon. It's not going to shock you when a boss battle comes. So I don't know what he's even trying to say. Again, he's just trying to sound like, throw out some buzzwords there without saying anything. As for this first part, you venture into a city, do a few part-time jobs, blah, blah, blah. This is such an uncharitable way of looking at things. Like, yeah, broadly, you might be correct. In the same way that I could say, oh yeah, in Skyrim, you walk around and swing some axes and you talk to a guy who takes an arrow to the knee, right? Like, that's a very uncharitable way of looking at Skyrim, and this is an uncharitable way of looking at Trails. This is the most standard of JRPG setups in both plot and structure. Wrong. I mean, you've already said that. You've already contradicted yourself when you've said that the characters and the world and the plot is amazing, and those are absolutely not standard, and nothing wrong with standard, even if it was, and it doesn't do anything to make them worth revisiting. I mean, not true, but whatever. Next page. Okay, so he starts criticizing the combat system, and this is pretty funny because this paragraph, he basically just doesn't understand what Trails combat is about, and this first sentence really shows. Second chapter's combat borrows a lot of concepts from a standard strategy RPG template. No, it doesn't. Just because it has a grid doesn't mean it's a strategy RPG. It's not borrowing from the strategy RPG template. Trails is not a strategy RPG. It's not borrowing concepts from a strategy RPG. I feel like this guy has a very basic understanding of what a strategy RPG, very shallow understanding of what a strategy RPG is. Like, he sees, oh, it's a grid, I guess it's a SRPG. That's what he sounds like to me. And again, this is just not true. The grid is there for area of effect spells. The turn order alludes to Final Fantasy X, where spells take a certain number of turns to charge. So this guy hasn't played Final Fantasy X because spells don't take a certain number of turns to charge. When it's Lulu's turn in Final Fantasy X and you hit fire, Lulu uses fire right away. So either this guy hasn't played Final Fantasy X or he forgot about it and he didn't even Google the game, but whatever. Certain attacks and spells have areas of effect, so where each party member stands during a given turn makes a difference. I had fun figuring it out at first, but it buckles under the weight of a few puzzling decisions. So I'll paraphrase this here. Basically, he's complaining about why you can't move and attack on the same time. And there's a sentence where he's like, but for whatever reason, you can't do it. As if, like, he doesn't seem to understand why you can't move and attack at the same time. So let me spell it out for him. The reason why you can't do it is because if you were able to move and attack, go to any position you want, then area of effect spells would be useless. When an enemy uses an area of effect spell, your choice is to either move and not attack or attack and get hit, unless like your positioning, you luck out and you get out of the area of effect while you're attacking. But if you got to choose every single direction, then that would be a problem because there would be no point for enemies to do it because you would just move out of the way every time and you would get a hit out of it too. So it really just wouldn't be fair, He also mentions that the enemies can push you in particular directions, but you can. This is kind of embarrassing, but I actually didn't know this was true. So I went and I tested it out. And if I'm understanding what he's saying here, what happened here is that, so I'm using an area of effect spell, and the enemy in this situation, if they could do what he's saying they could do, they would move behind Agate here and attack. But as you could see, they're not doing that. And eventually all three of them get hit by my spell. So I'm not quite sure what he's saying, but if one of you can confirm whether what he's saying here is true or not, that would be great. So I'll be a bit quicker. I'll paraphrase things. He briefly gives a nod to orb bints, but he really doesn't delve into them at all. And there's a lot to orb bints, and I feel like he didn't take the time to understand them. Next, he talks about how there's filler. Sure, yeah, I agree. There is padding that extends the length of the game. He mentions how he mentions the Orbital Shutdown chapter, and he describes it in the most uncharitable way possible. And I think this is a very unfair interpretation of this. There's a very good reason why the Orbital Shutdown happens, and I would argue that it's a pretty good chapter because it's sort of a last hurrah for all your favorite characters. You get to talk to them for the last time. You get to see your favorite NPCs for the last time. He doesn't mention that at all. He talks about how the last boss fights repeat themselves, and I think that's fair enough, but don't quote me on this, but I believe they have some new attacks the second time you fight them, and it also wouldn't make sense if they just became a completely different battle. On top of that, he fails to mention the tear-jerking dialogue with each of the enforcers after every single boss fight, and that's just criminal, man. Those parts really just got to me, man, and the fact that he doesn't even mention that while he's talking about the last boss fights is ridiculous. That's why I love the end of second chapters. There's just so many emotional moments. Next, he talks about how he feels like he's out of the loop with it. Well, no shit, you didn't play first chapter. Time for the conclusion. And this is pretty funny. So, he starts off with, like, dumb whataboutism, like, oh yeah, there's so many games that came out this year, so, like, yeah, just play Bloodborne, The Witcher 3, and Fallout 4 instead. This is just beyond parody, especially his mention of Witcher 3. To be fair, it was 2015, so it's more understandable, but he sounds like that Kool-Aid drinking Reddit user who posts on R Gaming and he's like, yo guys, have you heard of The Witcher 3? Have you heard about it? I just discovered it and it's amazing. But in general, if you ask me, if you're reviewing a game and you just say, oh, yeah, just play these other games, especially since you're talking about 3 Western RPGs, and Trails is a JRPG, it's got anime graphics, it's got turn-based combat, it's got a really in-depth plot, which none of these games have, except, I guess, Witcher 3's plot is pretty in-depth. It's a completely different experience from these 3 games, and no, I don't think you're better off playing these 3. If you ask me, Trails is better than all 3 of these, and I know that will be controversial for some people. I know that might piss some people off, but that's my opinion. And on a broader note, you don't just say, I would say when you are reviewing a game, either end it with, yeah, you should play it, or yeah, you shouldn't play it, or yeah, you should play it if you like whatever, right? For example, I reviewed Valkyria Chronicles 4 earlier this year, and I didn't say, oh yeah, play this game instead, because guess what? It's not my number 1 favorite RPG of all time. I could have said, yeah, play Final Fantasy Tactics instead. But it's a good game, and I recommended it, and I think that's what you should be doing. Though it's technically a 9-year-old game. No, it is a 9-year-old game. It feels far older. Well, you're playing a 9-year-old PSP game. This is a Vita version, and if you played the PC version, there's turbo mode. So, like, it's not technically a 9-year-old game. It is a 9-year-old game. So, if you have to see how the story ends, it's worth seeing through, but everyone else should look for something else to spend this much time with. No, play this series. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you all have a great day.